It's a great pleasure to have Professor Tony Hines with us today. Tony works for Leatherhead Research Association and manages the crisis management team. Tony's been speaking to the IFST Food Safety Group on TACCP. What does it mean to the industry? What does it mean to IFST members? Tony, that's one of the most interactive meetings I think I've ever seen, and I've never heard so many questions before in a meeting. So TACCP is obviously a very hot issue. What does TACCP mean to you, Tony?
Yeah, TACCP's about threats to the food supply chain, threats from intentional contamination, so disgruntled employees, politically motivated or ideologically motivated individuals who may want to cause harm to your business. What's really important about TACCP is a vulnerability assessment, is understanding the levels and likelihood of exposure to such people you may be faced as a business, and that's really important. What we don't want is everyone panicking that everyone's exposed to the mad, bad and sad. We're not. But as a business it's really important you go through that assessment. It's really important you understand that most of the threats come from people, and you really need to understand who your people are. We're really good at managing pathogens and microorganisms in our food production system. We need to pay as much attention to people as intentional contamination requires human intervention. So manage your people, understand the risks that people can bring, and learn how to mitigate the risks from those people.
So Tony, some people see this as an additional burden. Is that the way you see it?
I don't really see it as an additional burden, but obviously there's big companies with lots of resources and there's small SMEs. So it's easy to say you have a HACCP team and now I want you to have a TACCP team. I think there's some overlap. The key requirements to bring into your TACCP team are probably your HR, so you know and understand people, the people that bring in agency staff, gang master roles, etc. Understanding who your temporary staff are. That should be an HR function. The real benefit of TACCP is working HR and operations working closely together. So that if we have suspicions about a person's mental state, physical state, ability to be at work, that we have policies to remove them very quickly from the factory floor. Because we've seen issues in the past where people have not enjoyed their job, hated their boss, hated the business, and they've caused havoc with a very simple bag of peanuts. We don't need ricin or other very nasty chemical agents to cause problems in food factories.
I thought it was interesting, Tony, the way that you discussed the fact that we need to change our way of thinking, that we should be thinking like a criminal. How do you think that actually means we'll act in the future?
Right, well I think I made this statement 2 summers ago, 2 and a bit summers ago, and I've thought very carefully about it, and I've got people working in teams and I flick a switch and I get people thinking like criminals, looking at how they could introduce fraudulent activity, i.e. additional profit as a team, to get them to identify the opportunities, to get them to identify the opportunities for fraud, get them to identify the most vulnerable points in the food chain. I couldn't have said to any of the people here this morning, this is the most vulnerable point in your food factory of exposure to you. Only they can do that, or I need to be at the factory to work with them, work through a very simple production line diagram, if you like, to look at the points of vulnerability, the points of weakness where something could be introduced that wouldn't be detected, may cause consumers harm. Now there's an enormous spectrum of issue management, from tummy ache to multiple death. Now you're going to need some pretty nasty organisms to get to a multiple death, and let's hope no one's planning that. But if they were, which kind of food business would be involved? How could it be done? Could it be done without the contaminant being detected? Would it get all the way to consumers before the product quality change, the sensorial characteristics, the colour, the physical appearance of a contaminated product? I don't think we know. There's no magic bullet. There's nothing to say this wouldn't happen. But I think we're probably less vulnerable to this kind of attack from ideologically motivated terrorists than we are to the employee that is disgruntled, doesn't like us anymore, has fallen out, shouldn't be there, doesn't enjoy his job. So all the work that's been done, very difficult to get, you know, multiple deaths from food in a manufacturing environment. Nearer we get to consumers, the bigger the problem. But a simple assessment, you know, how vulnerable are you? Who's your workforce made up from? What's the local politics like? What's the, you know, different parts of the country, parts of London and major conurbations in the north are different to Exeter and Cornwall and Dorset and Surrey and Sussex because the workforce is different. We need to understand our workforce and what they may bring to our business that is uninvited.
It's very poignant that we're holding the meeting today, which is the anniversary of 9/11. Do you still think that there is a significant threat from outside disgruntled groups?
Well, I think a number of people have said that the food chain is very vulnerable to this kind of contamination. Now, we saw with horse meat, sadly, that actually we were exposed to a contaminant that we didn't know was there. So we need to be alert to what else could be introduced into our food. Horsegate, horse flesh, it wasn't a serious health issue, but it could have been. We know from incidents in Spain in the early 1980s that a large number of people sadly lost their life through consumption of cooking oil. Over 1,000 deaths. Horrific deaths. Now, what we need to make sure that doesn't happen again. We've seen deaths through fake vodka. We need to make sure that we have the enforcement authorities and the infrastructure to protect our consumers from being exposed to the criminality of such products, because there is undoubtedly a criminal element behind the production of that kind of food product.
So Tony, it seemed very clear in your presentation that TACCP is about people, and I don't think most food technologists think that way. Do you think there are other groups we should be bringing into our TACCP teams, HR or?
Certainly HR, and I eagerly await the. I've been very privileged to be part of the PAS 96 review team, and the new version of PAS 2010, I think it's going to be called, produced by the FSA amongst others, and a whole raft of experts from across the food industry. So that will be released later this year, and there's certainly a very big focus in there on people as the number one threat, because as I've said, intentional contamination requires a human being to introduce it, whether that's in our factories here or in our supply chains anywhere else in the world, and you know, so we have to. But I think we're focusing on what goes on in our food factories.
Tony, thank you very much for coming into the IFST's Food Safety Group. Certainly it's one of the most stimulating presentations we've had for a long time, and I think the importance of TACCP was illustrated by the huge number of questions that you answered. Tony Hines, thank you very much.
And cheers, Sterling. It's been an enormous pleasure. And I think the other thing to remember is that we started thinking seriously about food defence and threat analysis after 9/11, and as you say, it's poignant that we're meeting today. So thank you for the invite.
Thank you, Tony.
Cheers.